At a dusty gas station on the outskirts of town, 3 burly bikers revved their engines, mocking the quiet, unassuming Asian man pumping gas into his beat-up car. "Hey, Jackie Chan, need help lifting that nozzle?" one sneered, the others howling in laughter. The man sighed, his shoulders slumping, before casually removing his sunglasses. A glint of fire flashed in his eyes. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. The bikers didn't realize they'd just taunted the legendary Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee drove his beat-up sedan along a quiet, sun-bleached highway. He wasn't in a hurry. This road trip wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about the journey. The world had grown loud and complicated, and even legends needed a break. A few days of open roads, cheap motels, and greasy diner food were just what he needed to reset. The radio played an old jazz tune, crackling through the speakers as Bruce hummed along. The afternoon sun bore down as Bruce spotted a weathered gas station ahead, its lone attendant asleep under a faded Coca-Cola umbrella. Pulling in, Bruce parked next to an old pump, stepped out, and stretched. His small stature and relaxed demeanor belied the incredible power he held within. To everyone else, he was just another traveler passing through. But to Bruce, every interaction carried the weight of discipline and self-control, a philosophy he lived by. As Bruce filled his tank, the rumble of motorcycles broke the quiet. 3 bikers, clad in leather and tattoos, roared into the station, their exhaust pipes snarling like wild animals. Their leader, a towering brute with a handlebar mustache and a chain dangling from his belt, was Tank. Flanking him were Duke, a wiry man with a toothpick perpetually wedged between his teeth, and Razor, a muscular hothead who wore his nickname tattooed across his knuckles. The trio radiated menace, their eyes scanning the station for something, or someone, to entertain them. The bikers dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel, and surveyed the scene. It was clear they were looking for trouble. Spotting Bruce at the pump, Razor smirked. Well, what do we have here? Hey guys, look, it's Bruce Lee Jr." Bruce ignored them, focusing on the gas nozzle. He'd dealt with men like this before, men who thought size and numbers made them invincible. They didn't. But Bruce wasn't here to fight. He was here to refuel and move on. Tank and Duke sauntered over, chuckling. "You sure that little car can handle all this gas?" Duke jeered, slapping the roof of Bruce's sedan. Razor wasn't content with verbal jabs. He walked up and flicked Bruce's hat, sending it tumbling to the ground. Bruce paused, sighed, and set the nozzle back into the pump. He picked up his hat, dusted it off, and placed it back on his head. "Please," he said softly. "I'm just here to mind my own business." Tank laughed, a booming sound that echoed across the empty gas station. "Hear that? Little guy thinks he can tell us what to do." He reached out to grab Bruce's shoulder, but before he could make contact, Bruce shifted. It was subtle, a slight pivot, a step back, but it left Tank grasping at empty air. The bikers exchanged glances, their amusement turning to annoyance. "You deaf, buddy?" Razor snarled. "We're talking to you." He moved closer, his hand balled into a fist. Bruce looked at him, his expression calm but unyielding. "Don't do this," he warned, his voice low and steady. But Razor wasn't one to back down. He swung. What happened next was so quick that the bikers didn't fully process it until it was over. Bruce ducked under the punch, grabbed Razor's wrist and twisted. Razor yelped, dropping to his knees. Bruce released him with a shove, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. Tank and Duke stood frozen, their bravado replaced by shock. Bruce adjusted his hat again and turned back to his car. "Leave me alone," he said simply. But the bikers weren't done. Humiliation had a way of turning bullies into fools. Tank growled, "We ain't letting you get away with that." He charged, his massive frame barreling toward Bruce. But Bruce was ready. With a fluid motion, he sidestepped, stuck out a leg, and tripped the giant, sending him crashing into a stack of oil cans. Duke, the last of the trio, hesitated. He wasn't as hot-headed as the others, but loyalty, or fear, pushed him forward. He lunged at Bruce with a wrench he'd grabbed from a nearby toolbox. Bruce sighed, his patience wearing thin. With a swift kick, he disarmed Duke, sending the wrench clattering to the ground. A second kick swept Duke's legs out from under him, and he landed flat on his back, groaning. The gas station attendant, who had woken up amidst the commotion, watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. 3 hardened bikers taken down by one small man in under a minute. The air was thick with the scent of gas and the faint hum of the radio still playing jazz in the background. Bruce dusted off his hands, finished filling his tank, and got back into his car. He glanced at the bikers, now sprawled across the gravel, their egos as bruised as their bodies. "Next time, pick on someone your own size," he said before driving off, leaving a cloud of dust and 3 very humbled men in his wake. The bikers sat in stunned silence as the attendant stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief. "You boys might want to rethink your life choices," he muttered, stepping past them to reset the scattered oil cans. For once, Razor, Tank, and Duke had no smart comeback. They just stared at the horizon, where Bruce Lee's car was disappearing into the distance. Bruce's sedan hummed along the highway as he left the gas station behind, his fingers tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm of the jazz melody from his radio. He didn't spare a glance in the rearview mirror. Encounters like that were nothing new. He had long since mastered staying calm in the face of aggression. His focus now was on finding a quiet spot to grab a meal and relax for the evening. But a few miles down the road, the hum of motorcycles broke into his thoughts once again. At first, Bruce thought it was just another group of bikers passing through, but the distinct roar of the engines and the faint silhouettes growing larger in his rearview mirror told a different story. Razor, Tank, and Duke weren't ready to let him go just yet. Bruce sighed as the trio rode alongside his car. Tank banged his fist on the sedan's roof as Razor shouted, "Pull over, Bruce Lee Jr., we ain't done with you yet." Duke swerved dangerously close to the car, forcing Bruce to ease off the gas and steady the wheel. They were relentless, their laughter mingling with the growl of their engines. Bruce knew he couldn't ignore them forever. He spotted a turnoff leading to an empty lot by a field of tall grass. Without hesitation, he signaled and pulled into the clearing. The bikers followed, their tires skidding on the dirt as they circled Bruce's car like predators closing in on their prey. Dust swirled around them, and the setting sun cast long shadows, making the scene almost cinematic. Bruce stepped out of his car, his expression calm but resolute. The lot was isolated, the only sound coming from the distant rustle of the grass and the rumble of the bikes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady. Tank dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he approached Bruce. "You embarrassed us back there," he growled. "Nobody does that to us and gets away with it." Razor and Duke flanked him, their faces twisted with anger. Razor clenched his fists, the knuckle tattoos spelling out his name catching the light. "We're going to teach you a lesson, Kung Fu Master." Bruce glanced at the setting sun, its orange glow bathing the field. He took a deep breath, his body relaxed but ready. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said quietly. "I don't want to fight you." "Too bad," Tank spat. He cracked his knuckles and signaled to the others. Razor lunged first, his rage propelling him forward, but Bruce sidestepped effortlessly, using Razor's momentum to send him stumbling into the dirt. Before Razor could recover, Bruce turned his attention to Duke, who had picked up a metal pipe from his bike. Duke swung, aiming for Bruce's head, but Bruce ducked, his movements fluid and precise. He grabbed the pipe mid-swing, twisting it out of Duke's grip and tossing it aside. Tank, watching his companions falter, let out a roar and charged. His sheer size made him an intimidating force, but Bruce was undeterred. As Tank threw a wild punch, Bruce parried, redirecting the brute's energy and sending him off balance. A swift kick to the back of Tank's knee brought the giant down, his weight shaking the ground. Razor, now covered in dust, scrambled to his feet and rushed at Bruce with a switchblade he had pulled from his boot. The blade gleamed menacingly, but Bruce's eyes remained calm, tracking every movement. As Razor lunged, Bruce sidestepped once more, grabbing Razor's wrist and twisting it until the blade fell to the ground. With a precise strike, he disarmed Razor completely, leaving him clutching his hand in pain. The fight played out like a choreographed dance, each of Bruce's movements deliberate and efficient. He didn't strike out of anger or vengeance. Every action was calculated, designed to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary harm. The bikers, for all their bluster, were no match for his skill and discipline. By the time the dust settled, Razor, Tank, and Duke were sprawled across the lot, groaning in pain. Bruce stood in the center, unscathed, his breathing steady. He glanced at each of them, his expression unreadable. "Violence isn't strength," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's control, and you have none." The bikers didn't respond, their egos too battered to muster a retort. Bruce turned and walked back to his car, brushing the dust off his sleeves. As he opened the door, Razor called out, "Who the hell are you, anyway?" Bruce paused, one hand on the door. He looked over his shoulder, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just a guy trying to mind his own business," he said before sliding into the driver's seat. As Bruce drove away, the bikers sat in silence, the weight of their defeat sinking in. Duke rubbed his sore shoulder, muttering, "Man, we picked the wrong guy." Tank nodded, his usual bravado replaced with a grudging respect. Razor, still clutching his wrist, stared at the horizon where Bruce's car had disappeared. "That wasn't just some guy," he muttered. "That was someone we should have left alone." The clearing grew quiet as the bikers gathered themselves, their arrogance replaced by a somber understanding. They had crossed paths with a man who didn't just know how to fight. He knew how to live with discipline and purpose, and that was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Bruce continued driving along the quiet highway, the soft hum of the radio filling the car. The golden hues of the sunset gave way to twilight. His thoughts lingered on the bikers. While they were no serious threat, Bruce couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Trouble had a way of finding those who sought peace. Further up the road, Bruce spotted a small diner with a neon sign flickering erratically. He decided it was the perfect place to grab a quick bite and stretch his legs. Parking his car in the lot, he stepped out and inhaled deeply, the faint aroma of frying oil and coffee wafting from inside. A bell jingled as he pushed the door open, and a waitress behind the counter glanced up, her expression polite but tired. "Take a seat anywhere," she said, gesturing to the empty booths. The place was nearly deserted, save for an older couple in the corner and a trucker nursing a coffee at the counter. Bruce slid into a booth near the window, the view outside revealing the endless stretch of road and faint glimmer of stars. The waitress approached, pad and pen in hand. "What'll it be, hun?" she asked. "Just coffee, please," Bruce replied with a small smile. She nodded and walked off, leaving him to his thoughts. As he waited, he noticed a newspaper on the table, the headline catching his eye. "Local biker gangs cause chaos in small towns." The article detailed a string of incidents involving unruly biker gangs, and Bruce wondered if Razor, Tank, and Duke were part of the problem. His coffee arrived, and Bruce sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth. He was halfway through his cup when the familiar sound of roaring engines shattered the calm. His jaw tightened as he glanced out the window. 3 motorcycles pulled into the diner's lot, their headlights slicing through the darkness. It was them. Bruce sighed, setting his coffee down. The bikers dismounted, their loud laughter and heavy boots announcing their arrival. As they entered the diner, the waitress froze, her expression shifting from tired to wary. The older couple exchanged nervous glances and the trucker lowered his mug, watching the trio carefully. Razor was the first to spot Bruce. "Well, look who it is," he exclaimed, his voice carrying across the room. Tank and Duke followed his gaze, their expressions darkening. They strode over to Bruce's booth, their presence like a storm cloud blotting out the diner's light. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Razor sneered, leaning against the booth. Bruce looked up at them, his expression calm. "I was just having coffee," he said evenly. "You don't have to do this." "Oh, we do," Tank rumbled, cracking his knuckles. "You humiliated us twice. Now it's personal." Bruce sighed and stood, sliding out of the booth. The diner's patrons watched with wide eyes, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Let's take this outside," Bruce said quietly, not wanting to risk anyone getting hurt in the confined space. The bikers smirked, following him out into the lot. The older couple huddled together, whispering, while the waitress grabbed the phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. Outside, the night air was cool, and the stars above cast a faint glow over the scene. Razor wasted no time, charging at Bruce with a roar. Bruce dodged, his movements graceful and deliberate. He grabbed Razor's arm and flipped him over, sending him sprawling onto the asphalt. Tank and Duke hesitated for a moment before attacking together. Tank swung a meaty fist, but Bruce ducked, delivering a precise strike to the giant's ribs that left him gasping for air. Duke came at him with a chain, swinging it wildly, but Bruce caught it mid-swing, yanking it out of Duke's hands. The fight was quick and efficient, each of Bruce's movements a testament to his years of training and discipline. The bikers, for all their bluster, were no match for his skill. Within minutes, they were sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain. Bruce stood over them, his breathing steady. "I told you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Violence isn't strength, it's control." The diner's patrons had gathered at the windows, their faces pressed against the glass as they watched the scene unfold. The waitress stepped outside cautiously, her eyes darting between Bruce and the bikers. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Bruce nodded. "I'm fine. They won't bother anyone anymore." He turned to the bikers who were struggling to get up. "This is your last chance. Leave me alone, or you'll regret it." Razor, clutching his ribs, glared at Bruce but said nothing. Tank and Duke exchanged a glance, their bravado shattered. They climbed onto their bikes, their movements slow and pained, and rode off into the night without another word. Bruce watched them go before turning back to the diner. The waitress looked at him, her expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "Thanks," she said softly. "They've been causing trouble around here for weeks." Bruce gave her a small smile. Just doing what needed to be done. He walked back inside, finishing his coffee before leaving a generous tip and heading back to his car. As he drove off into the night, the stars above seemed a little brighter, the road ahead a little clearer, but in the back of his mind, Bruce knew this wasn't over. Trouble always had a way of finding him. Bruce's car rolled along the darkened highway, the headlights slicing through the night as the jazz radio hummed softly in the background. The diner encounter had ended without escalation, but the biker's persistence gnawed at him. Razor, Tank, and Duke had been humiliated twice now, and Bruce knew the bruises to their pride were worse than the ones on their bodies. Men like them didn't let things go easily. The quiet of the road was interrupted by the distant roar of engines, faint at first but growing louder. Bruce glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening. 3 headlights appeared on the horizon, weaving erratically as they gained speed. He sighed. "Not again," he muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. The bikers caught up quickly, their motorcycles flanking Bruce's car. Razor, at the lead, motioned for him to pull over, his face twisted in fury. Duke swung a chain above his head, the links clinking ominously in the night air. Tank rode alongside the driver's side, slapping the car's roof and shouting insults muffled by the engines. Bruce remained calm, scanning the road ahead. He spotted a deserted gravel lot by the highway. With a flick of the turn signal, he pulled in, the bikers following close. Bruce stepped out of the car, the night air cool against his skin. He closed the door softly and adjusted his jacket. The bikers dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel as they surrounded him. Razor stepped forward, his knuckles bruised from their earlier encounters. "You think you're better than us?" he spat. "You think you can humiliate us and drive off like nothing happened?" Bruce looked at him, his expression unreadable. "I didn't want any trouble," he said calmly. "You're the ones who keep following me." Tank let out a bitter laugh. "Trouble? You don't know the meaning of the word." He picked up a length of metal pipe, slapping it against his palm. "We're going to teach you a lesson you won't forget." Bruce sighed, rolling his shoulders. "I've warned you before. Walk away." "Not this time," Razor roared, charging forward with his fists raised. Bruce sidestepped easily, grabbing Razor's arm and twisting it behind his back. A sharp cry escaped Razor's lips as Bruce shoved him forward, sending him stumbling into Tank. The larger man growled, his anger boiling over. Duke swung his chain, the links whistling through the air. Bruce ducked, his movements fluid, and grabbed the chain mid-swing. With a quick yank, he pulled Duke off balance, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. Tank came at him next, swinging the metal pipe with all his strength. Bruce deflected the strike with his forearm, the impact ringing out in the still night. Before Tank could recover, Bruce delivered a precise kick to his midsection, knocking the wind out of him. The fight escalated, the bikers attacking with reckless abandon while Bruce maintained his composure. He moved like water, adapting to their every move, his strikes calculated and efficient. Razor lunged at him with a knife he'd pulled from his boot, the blade glinting in the moonlight. Bruce caught his wrist, twisting it until the knife fell to the ground. A swift strike to Razor's chest sent him reeling, clutching his ribs as he gasped for air. Tank, fueled by rage, tried to tackle Bruce, using his sheer size as a weapon, but Bruce pivoted at the last moment, sending Tank crashing into the side of the car. The vehicle rocked slightly from the impact, but Bruce remained unfazed. He turned to face Duke, who had retrieved his chain and was swinging it again. Bruce stepped forward, closing the distance in an instant, and disarmed him with a single strike. Duke stumbled backward, falling to the ground. The gravel lot fell silent, the only sounds the labored breathing of the bikers and the faint hum of the nearby highway. Bruce stood in the center, his stance relaxed but ready. He glanced at each of them, his gaze piercing. "This is the last time," he said, his voice firm. "You need to let this go. You're only hurting yourselves." Razor sat up, wiping blood from his lip. His eyes were wide, a mix of fear and frustration etched across his face. He looked at Bruce, his anger faltering. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Bruce didn't answer immediately. He bent down, picking up Razor's knife from the ground and tossing it far into the darkness. He turned back to his car, opening the door. "I'm just someone trying to live in peace," he said simply, sliding into the driver's seat. The bikers watched in silence as Bruce started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. Razor clenched his fists, but he didn't move to follow. Tank sat on the ground, his shoulders slumped, while Duke stared at the chain in his hands, his expression dazed. For the first time, they seemed to understand that this wasn't a fight they could win. As Bruce drove away, the moonlight illuminated the road ahead, casting long shadows on the asphalt. He glanced in the rearview mirror, the bikers fading into the distance. A small sigh escaped his lips, but his guard didn't lower. Trouble, he knew, had a way of circling back. The highway stretched endlessly before him, the jazz radio filling the silence. Bruce's hands relaxed on the wheel, but his mind remained sharp. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He would be ready. Bruce drove along the deserted highway, the hum of his car blending into the night. The moon cast a silver glow on the asphalt, but Bruce's mind was restless. The bikers had been left behind, but their persistence made one thing clear. They weren't finished. Bruce knew their bruised egos would push them until something broke, and Bruce wouldn't let that be him. Ahead, the faint glow of a small town appeared. The sign at the town's edge read, Willow Creek. It wasn't on any map Bruce had checked, but the sight of civilization was welcome. He pulled into a gas station just inside the town limits, deciding to top off his tank and get his bearings. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as Bruce stepped out. He felt the tingle of being watched. Inside, the attendant, a wiry young man with oversized glasses, greeted Bruce with a nervous wave. "Quiet night, huh?" Bruce asked as he walked inside to pay. "Too quiet," the man replied, glancing out the window. "You just passing through?" Bruce nodded. "Something like that. What's going on here?" The man hesitated. "We've had trouble. Bikers come in, raise hell, then leave before anyone can stop them." Bruce's jaw tightened. "They come here often?" "Enough to scare folks," the man said. "They've been out by the old sawmill lately." Bruce paid for his gas, his mind racing. If the bikers had a base nearby, it explained their persistence. Stepping outside, Bruce's thoughts were interrupted by the low rumble of motorcycles in the distance. 3 headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness. Bruce sighed, shoulders relaxing slightly. Deep down, he knew Razor, Tank, and Duke wouldn't let things go. The bikers pulled in, parking in a tight line to block Bruce's car. Razor dismounted first, his smirk sharp but humorless. Tank followed, his massive frame swallowing the light. Duke twirled his chain, the sound ominous in the quiet. "Well, well," Razor said, his voice mocking. "Guess we're destined to meet again." Bruce finished filling his tank, replaced the nozzle, and turned to face them. His expression was calm, his posture steady. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The only mistake we made," Razor shot back, "was letting you walk away twice. Don't worry, we're fixing that." Tank cracked his knuckles. "You've got nowhere to run." Bruce glanced at the attendant crouched behind the counter, pale and wide-eyed. Turning back to the bikers, Bruce's voice softened. "You're putting innocent people at risk. Is that what you want?" Razor's smirk faltered for a second. "Don't lecture us, old man. You're the one we want." Bruce took a slow breath, muscles coiling. "I've tried to avoid this," he said, "but you've made your choice." Razor lunged first, throwing wild punches. Bruce moved like water, dodging each strike. He caught Razor's wrist mid-punch, twisting sharply and sending him sprawling. Before Razor recovered, Tank charged like a freight train. Bruce sidestepped, delivering a precise kick to Tank's knee that brought him down. Duke swung his chain. Bruce ducked and closed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbing the chain and yanking it free. Duke stumbled, his hands raised, but Bruce didn't lower his guard. The fight was over in minutes. The bikers lay sprawled on the ground, groaning. Bruce stood over them, breathing steady. "This is the last time," he said. "Let it go." Razor sat up, frustration etched on his face. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Bruce didn't answer. He tossed the chain aside and stepped into his car. The attendant peeked through the window. "Are you okay?" he called. Bruce nodded. "They won't bother you anymore." The bikers didn't move as Bruce started his engine. He glanced in the rearview mirror, their figures growing smaller. The highway stretched ahead, quiet and endless. For now, the night belonged to Bruce, but as he drove, his mind wandered. Razor's persistence wasn't ordinary. There was something deeper fueling their rage, something Bruce couldn't quite place yet. Bruce thought back to the gas station attendant's words about the old sawmill. If Razor and his gang had made it a hideout, it explained their strange determination. It also meant they were building something bigger than petty harassment. He decided he wouldn't wait for them to strike again. Trouble, after all, needed to be dealt with at its source. Bruce pulled off the highway at a quiet turnout, consulting a map he kept in the glove box. If he was right, the sawmill would be a few miles down an unmarked road. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the stillness settle over him. A soft breeze rustled the trees outside, the only sound breaking the silence. Opening his eyes, Bruce made his decision. He started the car again and turned onto a gravel road leading deeper into the woods. If the bikers thought they could control this town with fear, they were about to learn otherwise. This time, Bruce would make sure they understood the meaning of finality. Bruce drove down the gravel road, the tires crunching softly over the uneven terrain. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy of trees, casting long shadows that danced as the car's headlights cut through the darkness. Somewhere ahead, Bruce knew, the bikers had their lair. He wasn't going to wait for them to strike again. He was going to end this, once and for all. The road led to an open clearing, the skeletal remains of an old sawmill looming in the center. Its rusted machinery and broken windows gave it an air of decay, but Bruce's sharp eyes caught the faint flicker of firelight inside. He pulled the car to a stop behind a cluster of trees, cutting the engine and stepping out. The forest around him was eerily silent, the chill of the night settling over his shoulders like a shroud. As Bruce approached the sawmill, he moved with practiced precision. The smell of gasoline and smoke wafted through the air, mingling with the distant sound of laughter. He crept to the edge of a broken window, peering inside. Razor, Tank, and Duke weren't alone. At least a dozen other bikers were gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. They were laughing and drinking, their voices carrying over the crackle of the fire. Razor stood at the head of the group, his arm in a makeshift sling. "We've let that guy humiliate us for the last time," he shouted, slamming his fist against a table. "Tomorrow, we take the fight to him. No more running, no more waiting." The other bikers cheered, raising their bottles in agreement. Bruce remained motionless, his eyes scanning the room. He noted the layout, the exits, the tools scattered around, and the heavy machinery. He had no intention of letting them come after him again. As the bikers grew louder, Bruce slipped around the side of the building. He found an old service entrance, its rusted door hanging on its hinges. Inside, the air was stifling. He moved silently, his footsteps barely a whisper on the concrete floor. He positioned himself near a stack of crates, watching as the bikers continued their drunken revelry. Bruce waited for the perfect moment. When Razor raised his bottle to make another toast, Bruce stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "You should have left it alone." The room fell silent, the bikers turning to face him. Razor's face twisted in rage, his bottle clattering to the ground. "You've got some nerve showing up here," he spat. Bruce's gaze swept over the room, calm but unyielding. "This ends tonight." Tank was the first to react, charging at Bruce with a roar. Bruce sidestepped, grabbing a wrench and striking Tank across the back of the knee. The giant crumpled to the floor, his momentum carrying him into a stack of barrels that toppled with a deafening crash. The bikers surged forward, their drunkenness making them sloppy but no less dangerous. Bruce moved like a shadow, his strikes precise. He grabbed a chain from the floor, using it to block a crowbar before disarming the wielder with a kick. Duke lunged at him, a knife gleaming. Bruce caught his wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the ground. With a shove, he sent Duke sprawling into another biker. Razor hung back, watching as his men fell one by one. His expression shifted from anger to fear. When Bruce turned his gaze on him, Razor took an involuntary step back. "This isn't over," Razor shouted, his voice cracking. "It is," Bruce said firmly, advancing on him. Razor grabbed a metal pipe, swinging it wildly. Bruce ducked, closing the distance in a flash. He caught Razor's arm, twisting it until the pipe fell. With a powerful strike, Bruce sent Razor crashing into the table, the wood splintering under the impact. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence shattered. Bruce stood in the center, his breathing steady despite the chaos. "Leave this town and never come back, or face me again. Your call." The bikers exchanged glances before dragging their wounded comrades away. Razor clutched his chest, his glare filled with hate but no longer defiance. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his words rang hollow. Bruce watched as they stumbled out, their engines roaring to life before fading into the distance. The fire crackled softly, the only sound left. Bruce turned, his gaze lingering on the scattered tools and broken table. As he stepped outside, the chill of the night air washed over him. The forest was quiet again, the danger receding. Bruce walked back to his car, his steps measured. He knew the bikers wouldn't return. Not after tonight. The highway stretched ahead, endless and silent. Bruce started the engine, the hum of the car blending into the night. The moon hung low, its silver light guiding him forward. For now, the road was his, and the peace he sought seemed a little closer. But in the back of his mind, Bruce knew peace was fleeting. Trouble always had a way of finding him, and when it did, he'd be ready.